My name is Melissa Trimmer. I'm the Corporate Executive Chef here at Dawn Foods. You're joining me today at the Dawn Foods Innovation Studio. We're going to be focusing on fall and holiday recipes, so let's see what we've got. What makes these petit fours so different is how simple they are. My baker's request bakes so level that I can simply do a 3-pound deposit on a half sheet tray, never have to trim the belly, and I just place it on my board here. I'm going to top it with my Dawn white buttercream. This buttercream is so workable, I can ice and decorate with it. I've loaded my bag with a speed icer with a textured side and a straight side. So I am going to spread my buttercream in a thin layer on my cake. Let's go ahead and freeze these in between. The nice part about cake is it freezes quickly. Overnight's best, but if you've just got a couple of hours, that's fine. So this is an iced and frozen sheet cake. I'm gonna do 1.5 by 1.5 inch squares. But to make that work, I have to get a square corner. So I'm gonna make sure I take a knife here that's as long or longer than the width of the cake. There we go. That's where I'm gonna start measuring from. Now I'm going to take a ruler and I'm gonna mark every 1.5 inches. All I have to do now is match up my top and bottom and just mark. I'm not cutting, I'm marking. This is a great knife for marking my cake, but if I try to cut with it, it's gonna tear my cake up. I'm dragging the knife slightly to mark this because if I lift up and down, I'm likely not gonna find the exact same cut again. I'm going to switch knives now. And the reason I do that is so that I get a nice clean cut. I've got my pitcher of hot water. I have my nice clean side towel, and I have a sharp French knife. Now the key to making these kinds of cuts beautiful and neat is not just a hot clean knife. A mistake I often see bakers do is they take it directly from the hot water to the cake. Well, that's just gonna create cake mush. Let's not do that. Let's dry that knife off in between. And now we're gonna make our clean cuts on that cake. So again, you notice that I'm dragging through instead of sawing because I want to make sure that I only make one cut on my cake so it's nice and clean. No sawing, one clean cut. Now this seems like a lot of work, it kind of is, but you get an awful lot of these out of a half sheet cake. So if you notice, the technique I'm using is I've choked up on the knife so I have control of it with my fingers. I don't hold it down here, hold it up here, and then I use my finger here to make sure that I'm placing it exactly where I want it. It stabilizes where my knife enters the cut. Now we're going to go back the other way. Notice that I've given myself a lip on all edges of the cake so that each of my pieces have a sliced design on them. Oftentimes, this cake is starting to get warm. When that happens, instead of drawing my knife through the entire thing, see how it's starting to drag? I'll stop and only cut half of it and then come back to the other half. I do this to keep, see that? I have to do that to keep it clean, otherwise I'll never get my cuts in. Cut items, I never want to take it over top of my cake because what if I drop it on my cake? So I want to take the few minutes to bring it like this around. It seems like a silly way to move my body, and maybe it is, but it ensures that I never drop a knife of scraps on my beautiful cake over here. Now these ones are almost pretty enough on this end, but not quite, and I'll tell you why. They got this. They'll never glaze nicely like that. Now it's time to make the glaze for the petit fours. When you make these in a high-end pastry shop, you oftentimes use chocolate, and it's time-consuming, it's hard to work with, and it costs a lot. One of the requests we actually had from the field recently was, how do we make these things using simple products we already have in our bake shop? What we are doing is we are using Dawn white flat icing. You can use fondant or the exceptional flat icing, and our Dawn Thinacet donut glaze. And it's a really simple ratio, it's 2 to 1, it couldn't be simpler. This is 2 pounds of my white flat icing, and I have 1 pound here of my donut glaze. Make sure you weigh them because, as we know, for bakers, weight is everything. So I am literally just going to go 2 to 1. I'm gonna put my thinnest set glaze in with my white flat icing, and I'm going to stir it up, and that's it. The key is, after you're done cutting them like I just did, you're gonna line your petit fours on a sheet tray, on a glazing screen, and you're gonna put them back in the freezer while you play with the glaze. You want them to stay frozen. So I'm gonna mix this around until it's all the way together, and then I am going to get this as hot as I can. I am almost going to overheat it on purpose so that it's thin enough to pour over my little cakes. So now that my glaze is really warm, it's important for me to pour it into something that I can glaze easily out of. I really like a quart pourer, but you've got to use what works best for you. Some people like a little larger, but if you've got the strong arms for it, right on. Some people like a little smaller, a pint pour. Some people even prefer a ladle or a sauce gun. At this point, it's all baker personal preference. I'm gonna start glazing. I'm gonna go around the sides and up the middle, and I gotta go fast. So it is key right now that we cover the entire thing. Don't worry about extra glaze. What we're gonna do is after we're done with this, we are going to strain it and reuse it. Have more go extra on the outside. You're gonna need that because you want these babies to be completely covered. Once these are completely enrobed like they are now, we're gonna take and put them back in the freezer for them to set up for a few minutes. Now remember, we used way too much glaze. All this glaze down here can be melted and strained and reused, so don't feel like you're wasting it, you're not. Our petit fours have gone back in the freezer just for a few minutes until they're nice and set up. Before I unmold them, because I want to use my glaze again, I'm going to lift up my screen and I'm gonna cut them over top of a board like this. And I do that so when I unmold them and they start releasing crumbs, they stay away from my nice glaze so I can reuse my glaze again another day. Isn't it fun to play with fire? It's my favorite thing. I heat up our knife. One of the things I love about this technique of using flat icing mixed with donut glaze is that it's really forgiving. You know, if you do a classic petit four, whether you're using a poured fondant or chocolate, if you're doing what I'm doing right now, where you're touching the sides of the petit fours, it'll leave fingerprints and you'll ruin your pastries. This one's super forgiving. You can just touch it, move it around, nice and easy. Now, at this point, you could decorate them with rosebuds for springtime. You could do drizzles for, you know, every day, whatever the case is. I'm decorating mine with some classic holiday decorations. Let's get started right away with our wreaths. I am gonna take a little cutter here. I'm gonna make sure not to touch my product, and I am going to gently mark the top. I used a variety of tips to make these designs. A small grass tip, a small open French tip, a leaf tip, a closed star tip, 2 more leaf tips, a larger one and a smaller one, and a straight round tip. Now I'm gonna use a star tip and make a wreath design on each of these. I'm gonna follow that little circle around so I get nice, perfectly little round wreaths. Notice how I'm twisting my wrist a little. Once my wreaths are laid in, I'm going to use a little baby wreath tip to just give me a little color. The next design that I'm going to use a cutter for is this little triangle cutter. Same thing as earlier. Gently mark the tops of these. And now I've switched now to a small green leaf tip. I do have to pause and say I'm using Dawn buttercreams right out of the tub, so it's great. They're beautiful, vibrant colors. This is my emerald green, that's my red. So now I'm going to pipe leaves. Instead of pointing up like you normally do, pointing sideways. So here we go. We're gonna use the bottom of that triangle as a key. After those are in, we're gonna take a little baby French tip. You gotta have a star at the top of your tree. So we're gonna lay some bright yellow in for our little star at the top of the tree. My next 2 are a poinsettia. So for my poinsettia, I'm gonna use 2 different size leaf tips. So we're gonna do 5 on the outside, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm gonna go to a slightly smaller leaf tip. This one I can do 4 right in between. We're gonna use that same yellow as our tree, and we're gonna do a little grass tip right in the middle for the center of our flower. Last, I'm going to do a couple of holly berries. So I'm actually gonna use the same tip I used on my Christmas trees for my holly berries. The biggest change is going to be how I hold the bag and how I drag it through. So I'm gonna start at one end of the petit four, and I'm gonna make a holly leaf, which is not straight like this, it's serrated. And now we're just gonna use a straight round tip to make some berries.